Hello, beautiful light-filled souls. My name is Tricia Barker, and I am here with Jeff Olsen. I'm very excited to talk about his new book and also his near-death experience, but the spiritual journey and what life is like now for you. And I'd like to begin, though, with your newest book, which is Knowing. And why did you write this after the first two books, and what are you hoping to explain to people through this book?
Oh, that's awesome, Tricia, and thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with you and such an honor. Knowing is actually a compilation of the first two books, and the reason I did it is this is the 20-year anniversary of the accident, and so many people had read the books and loved the books that I wanted to do not only a compilation but produce it in a hardcover, so it could be a library edition collector's book that included both I Knew Their Hearts and Beyond Mile Marker 80. But what I've done is I've gone into deeper insights on that. I mean, I've really expounded on things that I may not have necessarily been comfortable of talking about the first time around. And then I've also expanded it too. So there's 6 or 8 additional chapters beyond that of what's gone on since. And so, it includes the near-death experience, but it's the life experience. It's like, what do we do after the fact? How do we
Yes.
digest all this and the spiritual journey, as you said?
Yeah, and that's great. And I definitely have found that the more I've started talking and connecting with others, I feel more confident talking about things that I didn't feel confident talking about before. What are some of those things that you, over time, have felt more at ease discussing?
Well, like there's a lot of things. Some of it had to do with my experience on the other side and really just digesting how do I put into words being held in the arms of God. Now, I could say that, and many people, will understand that or they'll get that. But what it did for me is it literally kind of turned my beliefs inside out, upside down, and yet expanded them in ways where it took me a decade just to digest that. In other words, I grew up in a conservative Christian home. There was one way. God was the final judge, and I was probably in trouble based on how, just not being perfect and not doing everything right. But boy, my experience, the unconditional love that I experienced and the way that transformed, and then also how that applies in our lives. Not that I can run down to the corner and rob the bank now because everything's okay,
Right.
but how do we take all that love and all that freedom, and what do we do with it to really make a difference here?
Yeah, that love I try to explain in so many different ways. And do you ever come across people who you look at them and you think, oh, that's how I used to believe? They're behaving exactly me pre near death experience. Like, who exactly were you before your near death experience?
All the time. I mean, I run into that all the time, and yet, I realize that anyone I meet is simply a reflection of me. I mean, if something bothers
Yeah.
me, I really get to take a look at myself. But I was always somewhat sensitive, but before the accident, I was a red personality, driven career guy. I mean, I was running my own ad agency. We were winning a lot of big awards and landing big clients, and it was kind of a game of, make the team, get the job, get the girl, get the car, get the house, and I was also very judgmental. I mean, I felt that I'm on the right path. I've got it right. Everyone else, bless their hearts. That's a good Texas term. But bless their hearts. They're doing the best they can. But I'm right. They're wrong, and I'm grateful for that. But boy, I was very, very judgmental.
Yes, so we all can be. I think no matter who we are, that's like the natural human inclination to put ourselves up against other people. Like I was a college student when I had my near-death experience. So anyone who wasn't in university, anyone who, wasn't at this big university that I was at or didn't dress the way I dressed, then I just looked at them as not as cool as me, and these are very silly, childish thoughts, but that's just how I looked at people and how I thought about them if they didn't read the same books that I read. And then after the near death experience, I saw people's hearts. Like I saw that that was the most important thing. Like I saw how good they were and how their connection to the light, was it a strong connection? Did they pray for others? Did they were they at peace within themselves? Did they love themselves? Did they love others? And I love what you said in one of your interviews about love, and you were asked a very specific question on the other side. What was that exact question about love?
Oh, wow. And I'll tell you that the question was, to what degree have you learned to love? But I think the poignantness, the power of that question was, it was after I was wandering around the hospital, and I say wandering around, like moving freely. My spirit was out of my body. And this is what shifted me probably forever, as I was seeing, the doctors, the nurses, the patients, the families of the patients, but I was really seeing them. I wasn't looking at, oh, wow, look, there's a heroin addict. Well, that's their own fault. They made those bad choices. I was seeing everyone as these glorious, divine, perfect beings and realizing, wow, look what they've taken on in their life experience and how beautiful and how courageous and how powerful they are because of it. So judgment and comparison went out the window very, very early as everyone from, the heroin addict, but also the saintly grandmother, and just all of a sudden we were all in this together having a different, unique experience surrounded in unconditional love, and I was seeing it clearly without judgments, and that's what was cool.
We are so much more loved than we realize. Like, that's a message that I keep wanting to connect with other people. And I think it's especially hard. I come from, a Christian family as well that's pretty judgmental. And I think they looked at me at the time of my accident because I was agnostic and kind of this wild college student experimenting with drugs. And they were like, surely she's going to hell. I'm sure that was their thought about me. And that I experienced this love and this unconditional, this holding of me in this sense that, I was perfect as I was to God, and I was so deeply loved in a way that my family could never have loved me, that I could never have loved anyone. And that feeling was just so healing. And what I wanted to come back and share with them is like, hey, we're all loved, like, just lay down the judgments. Let's just be in love. And it was very disorienting. How did you integrate that feeling of love initially into your life?
Well, I think it was easy on a very personal level, but the struggle was, wow, I want all that. I want to feel here all that love, all that connection, all that oneness. And, I outlined this mostly in my second book, but I think for a long time I was searching, seeking, show me that love, show me that love. I want to feel that love. And in many ways was very lost and broken and actually homesick, longing for, gosh, can I just not die and go home and feel all that again? Because I was not finding it here, and yet it wasn't until I realized that I would never find it, that it had to come from within, and here again, coming from the background I did, it's the old beautiful truth, love your neighbor as yourself. And I was running, loving the neighbors, and I was looking for the neighbors to give all the love back to me, when in reality, until I loved myself, I had nothing to give. I was always going to be empty until I realized that the light was within me, and that I was the key to my own peace.
And we evolve and we continue to learn how to love ourselves more through every situation, through every moment. And that's something I've certainly learned. Like, I'll have these moments where I think, oh yeah, I've dealt with all my childhood issues. I've dealt with I love myself so much. And then I'm just slapped down, by circumstance. And I'm like, oh, I have to love myself through this. And so it is an ongoing process. And have you found that? Like, do you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's funny. My wife, Tanya, she would laugh. We all have our challenges. It wasn't just weeks ago that I was picking myself up the ground saying, oh my gosh, you get smacked down, and then it has to transform to not only self-love, but just trusting yourself and trusting the universe that this is only an experience. I'm going to learn from it, and I'm certainly going to get through it, and then I'll be bigger, better, and brighter on the other side. And so seeing it as a gift. But when things get hard, that's what I was struggling with. When it gets really hard, sometimes you don't see it as a gift. You're like, okay, this is not good, and then it isn't till hindsight that we say, wow, look what I learned. Look what I learned from that.
And we're so lucky to be connected to other people. I found this through teaching, but also through reaching out and writing and connecting with others, that anytime I feel like I'm going through something difficult, I'm just like knocked down at what someone in my class is surviving or going through. Someone's best friend is in a bad abusive relationship, or someone, just was kicked out of their house. And, you see all these really dire situations and students struggling, even just working a night job and coming to my class. And
Yeah.
like,
Yep.
okay, humility, like it is, it's a constant lesson to be connected to others.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's always someone who's worse off. I mean,
Yeah.
I wrote about that in both the first two books, and Knowing really does touch on that, of how
Yes.
you don't even have to look down the street and you realize, you know what, everybody's got their challenges, and so if we can love each other more through it, rather than judging or comparing, we'll be far better off.
So I do want you to jump in, and I'm not going to ask you to tell too much about the wreck and the accident. I know that you lost your youngest son and your wife in that accident, but I would like to hear about just the near-death experience, if you don't mind, because
Okay,
that's what
yeah,
I love to hear about.
that's easy. Yeah, it was my near-death experience was associated to the crash. It was a single car rollover, and the whole family was in the car, and I was banged up really bad. Both my legs were crushed. My left leg was amputated above the knee. My back was broken, but the spinal column not damaged. My rib cage was crushed. My lungs collapsed. My right arm almost torn off. The seatbelt cut through me and ruptured all my insides. But it was at that moment, and I didn't even realize the injuries, but it was at the darkest moment. I knew I couldn't move. I was losing consciousness. I was also very aware that both Tamara, my wife, and Griffin, my youngest son, were gone. I was aware at the scene that they did not make it. And my older son, who was 7 years old, was crying hysterically. And that was the moment where I lost consciousness. And what happened, and I only give that background because it was the deepest, darkest moment of my life. Suddenly, there was this calm, and I felt light. It felt like tangible light came and surrounded me, like I was surrounded in light. I didn't experience a tunnel. It was as if the tunnel came to me and just, comforted me. But in that deepest, darkest moment, I felt comfort. It felt like I rose above the scene of the accident, and suddenly I was fine. The pain was gone. I was able to breathe, and I was even wondering, well, what's going on here? And it was in that exchange that all of a sudden I realized that I was not alone. My wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene of the accident, was there with me. Now, I'll touch on that a little bit. That
And
I don't,
yeah, but
yeah,
that's how every near death experience is slightly different. And I really do believe that this is what solidifies how real they are because of the specifics that connect. So your wife was dead, and then she is
yeah.
there with you.
And I don't often talk about this because it's difficult. What took Tamara's life in the accident was head trauma. And I knew that at the scene of the accident. It's still difficult to talk about. So when I say suddenly she was there, but she was there beautiful, perfect, everything was okay. She was not injured. She was glorious. And yet she was the one giving the message, you got to go back. You've got to go back. I mean, you can't come, you can't stay here, you've got to go. So, to see her in that glorious state, not as I had seen her at the accident, was powerful and beyond words. But also making that choice, realizing, okay, I've got to go back. I mean, here I am looking at the woman I love more than life, but I've got a little boy crying in the backseat of that car, and I've got to go back. And that's what I already referred to. As soon as I made that decision to come back, that's when I found myself wandering around the hospital. I had no concept of time in this most profound goodbye I would ever say, but I had been life flighted to a level 1 trauma center, and yet as soon as I made the conscious thought and said goodbye to Tamara and thought I'm going back, I was wandering around that trauma center, seeing the doctors, the patients, the nurses, but in an incredibly new light. They were glorious brothers and sisters. In fact, I knew everything about them. I mean, I knew them as well as I knew myself, and there was this oneness, this connection that was just undeniable.
It's a strange knowing, isn't it? Like we can say that, and I know what you're talking about because I went out of my body and I merged with everyone in Austin.
Okay.
So I was in Austin at that time, and so people that I knew I began with, but then just people in the town for whatever reason.
Yep.
And that knowing to me, how I describe it is it's a heart knowing, but it's also just kind of a holistic knowing. It's like you know the whole picture. So it's not like you're judging one little moment like, oh, they did heroin. You know, it's you
Yeah,
see
yeah.
the child that they were, but it's you see it almost as a bubble. Is that how you
Well,
felt
yeah.
it or
I mean, I saw it, but I felt it. Gosh, I was
yeah.
connected. In fact, and even my background, which I always honor my background. I have no, I have no, it's been a perfect spiritual path for me, but I did have a biblical verse as I was seeing all
Yeah.
these people, and I realized the universe communicates in the language we'll understand, and so it was speaking to me in
Yes.
Bible,
Yes.
but the verse came as I was looking at all these unique and different souls. It was the famous verse that says, "Inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me." But it meant something so much deeper. I always thought, oh, that's a nice verse about being nice. But suddenly it's like, oh, I am them. They are me. We are literally connected as one. And so when Jesus was saying, well, when they came and said, well, when did we clothe you? When did we feed you? When did we do all these things to you? What he realized is he was no better or any different than the beggar on the street who might be naked, or the man in prison who had committed a severe crime. I mean, it was the oneness. And so that verse quickly shifted to me from a nice verse about being nice to, wow, it goes so much deeper than I ever imagined.
And I heard something too, similar to a Bible verse. I heard this, and the wisdom kind of came, it flowed in different ways. It's hard to describe, how it came in, but I heard like a light that kind of came through my spirit form, and it was like, be like a little child, and remind them to go to nature and to be like a little child. And so you wouldn't think that college students need to be reminded of this, but we do go out to the river or meditate or just we learn how to be more in the moment because that's what children know how to do is the
Yeah.
power of now and the power of this singular moment and how fun and beautiful and joyful it can be, and that's how I've interpreted it. But yeah, that Bible verse, it never really meant that much to me until the near death
Yeah.
experience, so I
Yeah.
know what you
Yeah.
mean. Yeah, so you traveled through the hospital, and what happened next as you were
Well,
feeling this oneness?
I eventually came to a body, a man laying on the gurney that I didn't feel anything from, which I found was very odd given the profound things I'd been experiencing. So I stepped closer to look, and that's when I realized, oh, that's me. But that wasn't me. I was having this incredible experience, but that was my body. That was the skin suit that I'd been having this experience in, and I was really quite overcome with sadness because I knew I had to get back in, but my body was an absolute wreck. And and that was a new awakening too. I had always taken my health and my vigor for granted. I had never really considered the miracle that my physical body was and the things we're able to do. And gosh, go out into nature and feel the grass and smell the trees. It's like, wow, that's a gift. And suddenly that body that would do that was not in good shape.
I know that feeling. I looked when I saw the blood pouring out of my body when my back was open during surgery. I wanted as far away from that thing as I could. I mean, that was like the thing I did not want to see. So I understand that feeling and I understand the fear. But before going into surgery, it sounds like you were in and out of consciousness. But in that moment, did you know you had to go back in and so you went back in?
Yeah, I knew I had to get back in. And again, it was as natural as the thought. I mean, I've realized our intentions are so powerful because I
Yes.
thought, how am I going to get back in? But it didn't have to figure out how. I just the intention, I'm going back in. But of course, then, and it was very painful to go back in. I mean, it felt like a lead, you know, blankets had been. It was very heavy. It was very dense. And then, of course, all the physical pain from the injuries, but also the emotional pain and trauma. The guilt, the regret, the absolute panic of the bereavement and losing half the family and what had happened, and also the fear of where is my surviving son and is he okay? You know.
And then you have to deal with the physical for so long too. So that's the hardest part. And I think I heard you talking about fearing that the morphine would wipe away some of your memories. I mean, I was on morphine for 9 days, and so I know what you mean. I got a sheet of paper on the third day out of ICU and tried to write down what I could because I was afraid in that state that it was going to wipe it away. Who knew that it would be so vivid, all these years later. But when did you first start realizing, okay, I'm different and I've had this profound experience?
Well, I mean, I knew after that I was different. The interesting thing for me, and like you, I was in the hospital for some time. I was in the hospital for almost 5 months. So I was in ICU for, I mean, 2.5, almost 3 months. But it's almost like I had one foot in this realm and one foot in the next during those times. And yes, I was on a lot of morphine, through those early stages. And gosh, I had a self-admin button, which the only thing that worked on me was my one left hand, but I would admin that morphine till it just knocked me out. And it was a long haul in the hospital. The interesting thing for me is the two profound experiences, because the second most profound
Yeah.
experience happened at the end of my hospital stay. So the two experiences, and the odd thing is I'll never forget them. No matter how much morphine or what I went through, the spiritual things are like yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the timelines sometimes of surgeries or what happened or what order, but I knew when I left my body at the scene of the accident, and there was no morphine there. That was right at the scene. And then the second most profound experience was at the end of my hospital stay after I was out of ICU, out of surgical recovery. I was actually in the rehabilitation unit and was only taking some Tylenol for pain. But I went back into those realms. I felt all that light again. And yet this time, I mean, it was strange. I went to sleep. I was finally able to lay on my side where the seatbelt had ruptured all my insides. They had finally stabilized that to the point where I could lay on my side. They had had to leave those wounds open for months because of the infection and everything. Well, at this point, I was able to lay on my side, and my younger brother was there, and he was teasing me because I had laid so long on my back, I'd rubbed the back of my head bald,
Yes.
But I went to sleep, and I felt that light again. I felt that rush of light surrounding me, and that rise above the hospital. But I thought, oh, wow, I know what this is. I've felt this before. And again, suddenly, everything, the pain was gone, and this time the light went away and I was in the most incredible, beautiful place. And the word I use now is I was home. I had always talked about heaven or the other side, but boy, this was home. And it felt so welcoming, and I found myself, in fact, I began to run. I was joyfully running, feeling like I'm home, I'm home, I'm home. And as I did that, and the strange thing is it felt, I don't know what it was like for you, but it felt very physical. It's like I could feel the ground under my feet. It felt like the most physical, sensual experience I had ever had. And yet,
Yeah, in the afterlife, the grass was so green and so beautiful, and the only person I knew in the afterlife was my grandfather. And so I remember my feet in the grass, and I remember, the
yeah,
feeling of it, and I remember how beautiful and young he looked. And yeah, so it was a very real experience. But I also know what you mean about the intention. So you have a thought that, okay, I'm going to go here. I don't want to be in this hospital room, or I want to be back in my body, or I need to do this. And I've often wondered, and this is just a philosophical thought, but don't you think we still do this now in our lives, but it's slower? So we have an intention and we're trying to go in that direction, but everything is just so much slower here. It's just so
yeah,
instant there.
yes, there it was, as quick as a thought. This is as quick
Yeah.
as a thought, and you go. And here we have to walk down to the store.
Yes.
But
But the bigger goals too, we have to keep thinking that thought many times to get
yeah,
us there.
right, but everything was super sensory there, and I did have an encounter. In fact, as I was just joyfully being home, I got the message that I wasn't there to stay. and I intuitively knew I was to go down this corridor, which was to my left, and so I made my way down the corridor. And actually, that's where I encountered my little toddler son. In fact, he was sleeping in a crib. And gosh, I just swept him up and felt him. And as I held him, I felt an intense presence come up behind me, which was so overwhelming. And I knew I'm in the presence of God. But as I held my little boy, I felt those divine arms wrap around and hold me. And there was a huge download of wisdom, peace, and all of those things. But to the point, that was with no morphine. That was at the end of the hospital stay.
Yes.
And yet that may have been the most profound near-death or visit to the other side of all of them, you know?
And I think I describe it as once we've crossed that veil, it's easy to keep crossing that veil, especially in those early moments. And
Yeah.
I couldn't take painkillers as soon as I got home. They were horrible, so I was just taking Tylenol as well. And I felt a lot of healing presence with me. The pain was just incredible, but I closed my eyes and I felt a connection to the angelic realm, and I felt, oh, okay, they're working on my back. They're helping me in this moment. In
Uh,
your long physical recovery, did you feel some of those moments? Did you meditate? Did you know to
you
do
know,
these things?
I didn't know to do those things yet. That was the interesting thing. Now, I did have nurses, and some of them, I wonder if they were from the angelic realms. But I had some nurses that would come in after hours, and they would say, "Let us do some work on you." Now, I mean, I was naive to any energy work or light workers or anything like that at that point. But gosh, these nurses would grab my feet, and they would. I suppose they were doing Reiki, but I could feel the effects of it in my body. I could feel the healing going on. And on one occasion, well, on two occasions, there was one time a male nurse that came in and simply washed my hair, and I never saw him again. And then there was a very jovial nurse who called herself Moon, and we had a very long conversation into the night, and it was more of an emotional healing. She was talking about bereavement when we lose people. The only reason I bring that up is usually, and with that long of a hospital stay, I knew the shift nurses. I mean, I knew their names. They were coming, and I realized the gentleman that washed my hair never showed up again, never saw him. The woman named Moon never showed up again. And when I asked the shift nurse about, where is Moon coming back, she didn't know who I was. So I've always wondered. So yes, not like you. I didn't feel angelic healing. These were like people literally coming in the room and working on me. But two of them, I sometimes wonder, maybe they were,
Maybe,
but I didn't know,
yeah, perhaps Moon was. And we're
Perhaps,
talking,
yeah.
we're talking on the night of a full moon. That's interesting.
I know. That's right.
So, yeah. So, as you began the recovery when you went back home, though, did you immediately want to hear about near-death experiences, or were you kind of shut off to that?
No, I was still so bereaved. I mean, I was
Yeah.
still so bereaved, losing half the family, of course, losing my leg and navigating the wheelchair. I went through a really, really rough time, and
Yeah.
I had to stay with my brother and his family for a while, and then getting home so I could get Spencer, my surviving son, back in school, and he was only 7 or 8 years old. I was so caught up in how to survive with my new body in the new life that I longed for that. I used to lay down at night completely stressed out, thinking, how am I ever going to do this? And I would ask for angelic visits. I would ask, and it sometimes wouldn't happen. So there was some long, lonely times that way. However, I know I was always looked after. I know they were always there. In fact, I know that my first wife, I don't even call her my deceased wife, I call her my angelic wife. She was there the whole time, even though I was unaware of it. And I only know that because as the years went on and as I eventually met Tanya and fell in love, and I went to my first wife's grave, and it was like I'm having feelings for another woman. Anyway, when that all came about, I felt Tamara leave. And when I say that, it was a beautiful thing. She communicated with me. She's like, of course you are. I want you to. You've been holding me hostage in your grief, in your pain, in all of it. and I can't move on until you are happy and moving on. And so, there was an exchange that way. But when I felt her go, that's when I realized she had been with me the entire time. And I was probably just so used to her presence that I didn't realize it.
And that's an interesting story for so many reasons because a lot of people ask us, one, about grief, but people also ask us about that connection to people on the other side. And I know that it's real, and I know that it's real because it's a connection through love. So any moment where I felt in deep need of love, or a moment where I'm really scared for my life, after the near death experience, I felt either my grandfather, grandmother, or dad there sending that love and energy, saying, you're going to be fine, take this path, and I didn't even think of it as being a medium or connecting to the other side in that way. It was just real, and I think a lot of times near death experiencers have these profound moments and it's just real for us. So your experience sounds incredibly intense and real.
Yeah, no, and it was very real to me. And that was another thing. I thought, am I losing my mind? I mean, that I really, there was a one point. In fact, my trauma doc and I had become friends, and that's a whole other story. But I was life flighted into a level one trauma center, and one of the physicians on staff had an incredible experience where he encountered my deceased wife in the trauma room as they're working on me. And he happened to share that with me, relatively early on. But we became friends simply because I trusted him. If he experienced that, then I could share with him some of the things I had been experiencing. But there was even points that I said to him, okay, this happened. Am I crazy? Should I see a psychiatrist? It's so real to me. Am I losing it? And, of course, he was very kind, and he would always kind of say, you have your own answers. But he said, no, it's not crazy if you're having those experiences. Because he asked a couple of questions. He said, is it real to you? And I said, it's incredibly real. And he said, are you getting the message? Is it changing your life? I said, yeah, it is. And he said, then embrace it. And not, but I was really kind of concerned that if I talked about those things that were so real to me, people might think I needed some kind of a psychiatric evaluation or something.
And we had our near-death experiences around the same time. Mine was 95 or 94, and yours
Yep.
was what, 97, 98?
97.
Yeah, so the world's come a long way since then, but I mean, it was beginning to open up to that idea. But I'm really curious about your surgeon. So tell me more about his shared or his shared death experience,
Yeah,
if you
well,
would.
it was interesting, and I'll paraphrase it. He's just written a book called Not Yet, where he outlines not only my experience but other experiences in the ER. He had been a level one trauma ER physician for over 25 years. He tells it that one of the nurses came and got him and said, "You've got to come to the trauma room," where I was, and she said to him, "She's there." And he's like, "What do you mean she's there? Who's there?" So it wasn't only him, it was another one of the nurses that got him. But he went in there and they both encountered Tamara, my deceased wife. However, she was there in the trauma room and he said she was communicating to him specifically. And I said, "Well, what was she saying?"
Yeah.
And he said she was simply expressing her gratitude for all that we were doing to save your life. And that's when I knew he wasn't making it up. I thought that's exactly what Tamara would be doing. And
Oh.
and so we kind of became friends, and I would share these things with him, and I had a safe place to speak to, because, and as you know, you talk to family about it, and they go, "Oh, of course you did," and your family loves you, and mine was very supportive. But it was really interesting to have a third party, unbiased clinician, medical
Yeah, that's
doctor.
wonderful.
I could say I'm having, and dreams. I mean, did you ever? I continue to dream. I mean, my little son I lost comes to me in dreams, except he's a full-grown, beautiful young man now. He's not the baby that I as he left this world. And in my first experience, he was the toddler, but he comes to me as a full-grown man now.
Interesting. You must get a lot of people who are deeply grieving the loss of someone, and there's nothing worse, I think, than the loss of a child. What do you say to all these many people who come to you, and what kind of advice can you give? Because they come to me too, and I'd really be curious from your perspective.
Well, it's tough. I mean, because you never know what to say. I mean, we should know what to say, right? We've been through,
Right.
and oftentimes I can only hug them, and I mean, I have no idea what they're going through simply because I only know what it was like for me, but I can say I went through my own pain. Be patient with yourself. And of course, I can tell them they're never really gone. Just wait. But that doesn't ring true to someone who's just lost a child or just lost a spouse. They're like, no, they're gone. And it's like,
Yeah.
yes, you don't see them in this realm, but just watch what they'll do in the angelic realms as they support and cheer you on and become literally your guardian angels.
And people want confirmation right away. And
Yeah,
when they don't get it, they're upset. And I often tell them, but it might not be 5 years for you. You don't know when that confirmation is coming. I mean, I was lucky to have confirmation from my grandparents before my dad died and to have constant confirmation from my dad and until there was a brief point when I didn't. But you know, that information was important for me, at that time.
yeah,
So for others, it might be, they go through the natural grieving process. And I did. I remember being shocked that even though I had the spiritual connection, I still had a physical grief that just
yeah,
floored me. Like I had never experienced a depression like that where food didn't taste good. And, I was like deeply depressed when my dad died. And so I know that people have to be tender with themselves. Like it's a real physical process that you go
yeah.
through.
Yep, and that's the main thing is be patient with yourself as you go through it. I mean, it is a process. And I often say, you'll never really get over it. You'll get used to it. You'll get used to it. But yeah, I think often we're grieving so hard we can't feel the influences because we're so trapped in our own grief. And that's how I was.
Yeah. So I'm curious now, you're going to this conference in Austin and you're leading this
Yeah.
workshop. I want to hear more about how you interact with others and what gifts you think you bring to this community of people who are so interested in our experiences.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm going to be the workshop specifically. I mean, I'm going to be speaking about my near-death experience and expounding way deeper into all those things. Then we're doing a workshop together. Dr. Mary Neal and I are going to be, you know, a dynamic duo in that simply because we both had the near-death experience. We both had severe, physical injuries. We've both lost a child. And she was told, her child passed away many years later, but she was told in her near-death experience that would happen, and it actually played out. We're going to be talking not only about the near-death experience, but we're going to be focusing on the wisdom that we gain in everyday life, that you don't have to have a near-death experience to have that spiritual connection, and that you can truly stay connected, not only with deceased loved ones, but just with those heavenly, divine realms in your life without having to go through all the trauma to be there.
Yeah, so when I meditate on that love of God, that unconditional love of God, I feel so much better in my own life. And I think that that's one thing that other people can do is just meditate on how beautiful that experience is. Maybe we're good at translating that for other people who haven't had that experience, that maybe that's part of our joy that we give to them.
Yeah, yeah, and we're going to be doing an exercise. This is something I've done before, where anybody, I mean, literally anybody can feel what it's like to get that message from the other side and know that it's for them, and actually know exactly who it's from. Many times too, we're going to do a little exercise like that. But yeah, we all have that ability. The near-death experience might open some doors and windows, and they never really close. But we all have that ability if we're simply open to it. And I love meditating. I mean, I used to pray, I'd say very, prayers. Now it's not about talking; it's about shutting up and listening and just receiving the answers. Yeah.
There's even some judgment in that. Like I see people pray and they're kind of like, "Oh, I just gave a good prayer," out loud. And I'm like, "But hey, if you're better at listening, that's the that's the
Yeah.
truth."
Uh,
Because
uh,
God has some profound things to say.
Yeah, I've realized it's just better if I shut my mouth and listen. It's a lot better.
Yeah, so I'm also curious about there seem to be different waves. So I think I heard you say somewhere that it took about 10 years to fully process the near death experience. At this 20-year mark, what do you feel now? And that seems to be a big marker for a lot of near death experiencers.
Yeah, I'm settling into it. And what shifted is it's like I want to make a difference. I mean, in the first while, it was about me and how I healed and my experience and talking about that. Now it's like, what's my contribution to the world? I mean, how can I take what I know or take what I've learned and really, really make a difference? I don't want to go back home and say, hey, I didn't do what I was there to do, and I'm really here at this point after 20 years to take a stand for love and unity. And I've come to the conclusion that heaven's right here if we choose to make it that way. And it's up to us. Humankind is going to have to come together and resolve our own problems and bring our own love to make it heaven right here.
Yes, and there is a lot of suffering on this earth. And one thing that this is what I have determined is my mission from now until the end, and that is simply to send light and healing in any way that I can, whether that's through making a video, whether that's through talking to people, whether that's through giving comfort in this moment to moment teaching experience, and whether it's even through transcendental meditation, whether I'm sitting on a mountaintop and just sending that light and love into troubled areas. Like, that is my essential meaning in life, is just to give love. And it's not, and that shift happened, I think, around 2008 for me, where it became evident that it wasn't about what I'm getting, it's really about what I'm giving.
Yeah.
And that's the huge shift. And then you feel great, as that
Yeah.
love comes through you. It's not.
Well, I think those things are very real. I mean, when
Yeah.
you send light, when you send love, I believe that when we look at that from the other side, you're going to see the difference that those made that were committed to love and were sending out that intention to heal, to bind up the brokenhearted and to heal those that are grieving and to do their part, which may be done very quietly behind closed doors, but it does
Yeah.
make a difference. That stuff's very real to me.
To me too. And that's what I saw in my life review, is how much love I gave or didn't give. And I wasn't judged, but I did see, and I think I judged myself a little, that I wanted to give more love, that I wanted to be less judgmental, and that I really, anytime I make an effort and I wake up that morning and I think, okay, today is about love, then it's just a day that flows so much better. And that's something we could definitely teach, I think, through these workshops and through connecting with others, and that's a wonderful experience. So another question that I had, that I think I heard you talk about, that I related to, was that you couldn't wear a watch. That time just seemed so like just ridiculous to you after the near death experience. I
Yeah,
broke 5 watches and I just
I
gave
still,
up.
I still don't wear a watch. I have some nice little, dangly bracelet things, but watches don't work. They break. Computers often won't work. Electronics they don't like me. But yeah, time became irrelevant. I mean, I had a very strong sense that all I had was now, and you mentioned that. I mean, yesterday is gone, and I have no idea what's going to happen 10 minutes from now. But boy, I have now, and in this sacred moment, I can choose how I'm going to be, how I'm going to project, and what kind of love I'm going to share. And yeah, I don't wear a watch. It just seems irrelevant to me.
I'm pretty good at predicting time. I don't know if you are too, but I can usually get it within 10 to 15 minutes, so I'm not too far off.
Yeah,
So
I'm,
it's
I'm usually on time. I actually make mistakes on time, but yeah,
it's
don't.
it's funny, that timelessness. It's, yeah, I came back here and I felt so much happier, even though, and my extent of recovery was about 9 months, so it wasn't probably as extensive as yours, but I had to learn to walk again, and I had to, take it slow. And so I was joyful though, every step. Instead of like looking at that pain, I was like, thank you, God, for every
Yes.
step, for every step. And so that kind of joy was part of my recovery.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you felt some of that too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's what I love about you, Tricia, is you get it. I mean, you get it. It is a gift. life is a gift, and that was the biggest shift. I thought it was a test. No, it's a gift, and every step, gosh, let's take it in gratitude, because had it gone another way, I might have still been in that wheelchair. And there's plenty of people that
Me
are. I
too.
have a dear friend that's, quadriplegic. I mean, he's never going to walk. And so, like I say, you don't have to look very far to say, wow, I really am lucky. I really am blessed. And then how can I serve those that are around me in a way that works?
Yeah, and we'll end with this question, but it's something that I heard you say in an interview and it made a lot of sense to me, but you talked about healing a childhood wound of yours of feeling inadequate. And for me, there were so many wounds in childhood. I had a lot to heal. My parents had a bad relationship. I grew up poor. There was some abuse and neglect. And so there was a lot within me that even after this profound near death experience, it took a good while to work out a lot of these things. And what I've learned, over time and what I'm trying to communicate in the book that I've written to, and really to a lot of kids who have gone through abuse and have
Yeah.
survived it, is that it connected me to so many other people. I'm not the only one who struggled, and people have struggled in far worse situations. And if I could learn to love myself, then I'm that beacon of light to show someone else that it's possible to love oneself. So that's something that I've learned. But what was something that you learned through your journey about things that were from your past that you had to heal?
Well, and this is on the back side of it. This is that 20-year mark. I've finally come to the conclusion that we're always enough. I mean, from a very early age, I always felt inadequate. I wasn't enough. I overachieved to make up for it. I had loving parents. They were divorced, but gosh, they were great. It was self-imposed. That's what I realized is I impose on myself um,
Yeah.
for the most part. But at this point, self-love is the key. You've come to the same conclusion I have, that if I can love and accept myself, then I'm filled with love, and therefore then I can give abundantly to others in a way that really, really does send a ripple effect out of healing and of the world shifting into a higher consciousness.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And this is, I know I said that was my last question, but are you still in contact with your wife, or did that pretty much end your first wife?
No, no, she's very much in contact. In fact, my current wife has had many
Oh,
uh,
really?
yeah, many situations where they've communicated, especially in raising Spencer. And of course,
Mm,
Spencer's now 28. He just turned 28 yesterday. He's grown up, married, and
wow.
away things go. But no, my that's why I say my angelic wife is still very much in our lives, and I say our lives, the whole family's life. They really are our guardian angels. They don't go away. They're just in a different realm, doing what they can do from that perspective, which may be far greater than what they can do from this realm.
How beautiful. Yeah, not many people have that knowledge, but that's wonderful that you can connect with it and express it in that way.
Oh yeah, well, and that knowing this new book is all about that. I mean, it goes right up into very recently when and Griffin and Tamara are very much involved in my life and in many lives around me. So,
And
yep.
how has he been involved in your life?
Oh, Griffin is awesome. He is my most mighty guardian angel. I mean, he feels like he's my protector. He's my motivator. And yet, one of the most beautiful things, and I'll share this briefly, but he came to me in a dream where and I say dream, I think it's a visit. It was one of those lucid dreams, but I was literally remembering being a little child. And I was thinking in the dream, gosh, I remember this like yesterday. I couldn't have been any more than about 14 months old. And that's when it hit me. That's how old Griffin was when he left this world. Well, in that instance, everything in the dream kind of faded away, and there he was standing there as a grown young man. And I wanted to rush to him, but he kind of sent to me, telepathically that he wanted me to remember being a child, because he wanted me to know that he would never forget being my little boy, and that he would never
Oh,
forget what it was like to have me as his dad.
oh,
And of course, at that point, he did speak and he said, I have a message for you. And I ran to him and I was able to get to him and I embraced him and it felt very like a, very real dream or visit. And, I thought he was going to say something so profound, or give me some guidance in my life, but he leaned into my ear and I get emotional when I talk about it. He said, Dad, I love you and I'm proud of you. And that's it, but of course I was just gushing and woke up or came to myself still with the tears, thinking what more profound message would I want than this little boy who I lost as a toddler, who has watched my life and been involved in my life and has been my guardian angel, still loves me, is still proud of me in spite of it all, and that was very meaningful. So
Oh, that is. And I do believe that they give us what we need most, like in a loving way, because they're with that light and they're with that unconditional love, and so they know how to communicate it to us. I was initially worried when my dad died that I didn't have enough time with him. He had brain cancer, and so that last month had 9 classes to teach, so I was running in the evenings just to be with him, and I had only so much energy and so much time. And the first thing he said to me in one of those visitations was, hey, I used up all my energy just with you, and then I slept the rest of the day, so don't worry. Like
yeah,
I lived for you in those moments, and you were there plenty. And it just was this huge relief, like, oh, okay, I did the best I could, and it was good enough for him. And so I think that love and that comfort that they give us is amazing. Thank you
yeah.
for sharing that story. And thanks for talking with me. This went so quickly. I relate to your story in so many ways. We could just keep
Yeah, well,
talking, but
I can't wait to see you in Austin. It's going to be fun to
yeah.
connect, and we have so much in common. And thank you sincerely for the conversation and having me on the show. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And please subscribe to this show, and I will put a link to other interviews with Jeff Olsen at the bottom. And I would love to keep up with you. Thank you very much, and may you be blessed.